Hello and thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm your host, Steve Lance. Here's a look at some of the stories we've been following for you today. President Biden is addressing the nation before Congress tonight in his first State of the Union address. He'll discuss America's role in the Ukraine war, and he plans to announce a new plan to tackle inflation and mental health, an area where he hopes to find common ground. With the world on edge as the situation in Ukraine continues to unfold, and as President Biden prepares to address the nation, we spoke to House Republican Conference Vice Chair Mike Johnson. We asked him what he thinks is the state of our union. And on this big day, a group of people from across the country come to Washington, D.C. What do they have to say to President Biden? Many countries are supporting Ukraine as its citizens fight off Russia's invasion. But are we giving Ukraine what it really needs? President Biden is speaking before Congress tonight in his first official State of the Union address. And for the first time in 2 decades, talk of war will be a heavy topic on the agenda. But Biden will also make the case for his plans on the domestic front. He's expected to announce new plans to tackle inflation and the mental health crisis. NTD's Melina Wisecup is there covering Biden's big night. Melina, what can we expect from tonight's speech?
President Biden in his speech tonight will certainly address America's response to the Russia-Ukraine war, and specifically he plans to highlight the sanctions that he's placed on Russia and Russian President Vladimir Putin and the effect that those sanctions have had on Russia's economy so far. Biden will also highlight the extensive U.S. aid that has been sent to Ukraine during their time of need. But aside from focusing on this war overseas, Biden will also address his plans domestically as far as the economy and pandemic recovery. Now, specifically in regards to the pandemic, Biden's expected to hone in on the ripple effects that the pandemic has had on Americans' mental health. He's expected to outline a new plan for addressing this widespread mental health issue. The White House this morning just laid out the details of this plan and called it a unity agenda, because this is a way that Biden's trying to really bring both parties together, since mental health is something that both parties generally stand behind and support. And as for the economy, President Biden will certainly talk about the lowered unemployment rates as well as the 6 million jobs that have been created during his presidency. He's also expected to address inflation and his plans for tackling inflation. The White House just said this morning that he would outline a new 4-point plan for tackling inflation. Now, we've heard in the past from President Biden, and we'll probably hear this again tonight, that he thinks the Build Back Better bill is his top solution, his preferred solution for tackling inflation. And it will be interesting to hear the language that he uses when he talks about this Build Back Better bill, because we know that members of Congress, leadership in Congress, the White House is talking about breaking this Build Back Better bill up into different pieces. So if we pay attention to the language that Biden uses when he's talking about this, we may be able to catch some of what are his top priorities, his must-passes in this Build Back Better bill. Now, Biden will also address his plans for lowering costs on gas. Gas prices are at a 7-year high, but Biden has yet to outline a specific plan for how to lower these prices at the pump. Now, at the same time this speech is happening, the president continues to slip in the polls. The latest poll numbers from CNN show that just 40% of Americans approve of President Biden's time in office so far, and 54% of Americans disapprove of his performance so far. So as President Biden is giving this speech tonight, it does come with pressure, and we'll hear from him soon.
With President Joe Biden set to address members of Congress in his first State of the Union speech, we just had a moment to sit down with Louisiana Congressman and Vice Chair of the House Republican Conference, Mike Johnson. Here's a look at what he had to say. Congressman Mike Johnson, thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Glad to be with you.
Congressman, we're here right before the State of the Union address this evening by President Biden. Going into this speech, what is the state of our union?
State of our union is in decline. It's in crisis. We've been saying this over and over for weeks and months now. As soon as President Biden took office, he began to do almost reflexively the opposite of what President Trump had done and accomplished in his 4 years, and we see the results of that. You know, we always say elections have consequences. This time it's had very dangerous consequences, and you can go down the list. Every measurable category of public policy, they've turned into a disaster, into a crisis, whether it's the open border that has led to all sorts of other crises that have spun off, the rising crime rate, skyrocketing inflation. You have delayed government services for people in all these various areas. And now we've shown weakness on the world stage. And as we always say, weakness invites aggression. And this is a very, very dangerous time. All of this could have been avoided.
Now, another thing Americans are experiencing is higher prices at the pump. Just today, oil's broke $100 a barrel. There's no sign of it turning back. How can this be managed? Is there a way out of it?
Listen, energy security is national security, and this is not just about the pain at the pump. It's not just about high costs. It's also about instability around the globe, and we see the direct effects. I'm from an energy state, Louisiana. We're big oil and gas producers, but when President Biden took office, just reflexively, his first couple of days in office, he issued that blizzard of executive orders, and among those were, of course, stopping the Keystone Pipeline, which would have been key for our country to maintain our energy dominance, not just energy independence, but energy dominance. And then, of course, he put the moratorium on federal lands production, and that included off the coast of Louisiana as well. All these things had very, very negative consequences for production and for our own domestic supply. And, of course, the greatest tragedy of it all is that to meet our demand in the U.S., we had to then go to Russia hand in hand, Saudi Arabia, ask them to supply our oil needs. It's just crazy public policy. And so not only did that put us in reliance upon Putin, but it flooded his coffers as well. And so now he has hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars flowing through his accounts because we're seeking our oil and gas supply there when we have it just beneath our own feet. We need to reverse those policies immediately. And we are so hopeful that tonight we'll hear some of that from President Biden, that he'll acknowledge the error of his ways and do something different. I certainly hope he does for the state of the country.
Congressman, my last question for you before we let you go. Do we run the risk right now of losing sight of the bigger picture? Arguably, China is the largest threat that the country or the world faces while this situation in Ukraine plays out. How can we manage this the right way?
You're exactly right. We don't need to lose sight of our two major dilemmas, crises, the true existential threats. One of them, the first, is our national debt. Of course, we just crossed the threshold of $30 trillion, which is almost an unimaginable number. And if you ask the leaders of our military, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Pentagon, quietly and publicly, they'll tell you the greatest national security threat to us is our debt. The second and very close is China. They're almost a peer-to-peer adversary of ours. This is an unprecedented moment. China is trying to rebuild a great empire, and they are far and away our greatest national security threat in terms of an adversary. So Russia is important, and this has captured the world's attention right now. But you're exactly right. We cannot take our eye off China and the Chinese Communist Party because they're insidious.
Congressman Johnson, thank you.
Thank you.
3 Democratic lawmakers tested positive for the CCP virus just ahead of President Biden's State of the Union address. 3 Democrats, including 1 senator and 2 representatives, said Tuesday that they had tested positive for the virus, all with breakthrough cases. All 3 members were fully vaccinated. All lawmakers who plan to attend the State of the Union are required to get a COVID test beforehand, but masks will not be required. States are lifting their COVID mandates, or at least some of them, but some Americans say they expect more from the administration. NTD's Iris Tao brings us the latest from a rally today in Washington, D.C.
The State of the Union's right around the corner, happening actually tonight. And a group of people from across the country are here in D.C. today with a message for the president.
I'm going to make sure that me and my family are living free, even if we live in a box, man. I'm being straight up.
A rally against COVID mandates and in support of the truck convoys happening near the Washington Monument on Tuesday. Despite the cold weather and a small crowd, the organizer says it means something bigger.
And when you stand behind something, it doesn't matter. Everything doesn't matter. I'm not doing this for popularity, reputation, money, power. That's not what this is about. When it comes to my God-given rights, I'm going to do what is right.
The group is calling for more mandates to be lifted further, including for the unvaccinated. Pastor Derek Gates flew in from Los Angeles.
They either drop it all, or I think that these protests will just keep getting bigger and bigger. Where if people in Los Angeles, the bluest city in the United States, are standing up, people here will stand up, and people will stand up all around the United States.
For you to make that trip and tell me about this means a lot to me, seriously.
And an 80-year-old retired police officer drove all the way from Chicago.
Got grandchildren, I want them all lifted.
He says he's here to speak for ones he cares about, including his great-great-granddaughter.
Her wearing the mask makes it hard for her to breathe. She has a hard time breathing, having cystic fibrosis, and here they wanted to put the mask on. No, you can't do this.
And different states are dropping their mask mandates, but some do not cover all settings. DC, for example, is lifting most of its indoor mandates starting today, but schools are not included.
We need him to go the next step and declare that the mandates, the Emergency Powers Act, is ceased.
Several trucker convoys are heading for Washington, D.C. Among them, the People's Convoy is set to arrive this Saturday. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Iris Tao, NTD News.
3 heavily blue states, California, Oregon, and Washington, will no longer require that school children wear masks. These states are reporting a dramatic decline in CCP virus cases. They'll drop their statewide school mask mandates on March 12th, regardless of a student's vaccination status. And as Russia invades Ukraine, the international community is hitting back at Russia's economy.
A British official said they were putting in place the severest sanctions the UK ever has done in history.
Freezing bank assets, cutting Russia off from vast parts of the SWIFT system, targeting companies, targeting oligarchs, banning flights, banning vessels from Russia.
YouTube stopped some Russian state media outlets in Europe from monetizing ads. In America, Visa and MasterCard blocked multiple Russian financial institutions from their networks to comply with Western sanctions. On Tuesday, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken questioned whether Russia could continue to be a part of the UN Human Rights Council, given the unprovoked attack on Ukraine.
One can reasonably ask whether a UN member state that tries to take over another UN member state, while committing horrific human rights abuses and causing massive humanitarian suffering, should be allowed to remain on this council.
Numerous U.S. states are imposing some form of boycott on Russian goods. New York governor signed an executive order Sunday forbidding her state from doing business with Russia.
To send a strong message where our priorities are, and they're with the Ukrainian people and the country of Ukraine, and to make sure that we are not spending any taxpayer dollars in support of propping up that regime.
The free world is eager to help save Ukraine by sanctioning Russia. But are we doing everything that needs to be done?
The one thing we're not doing that would affect him the most is sanction the oil and gas sector of Russian economy. The Ukrainian ambassador was begging for 2 things: go after Putin's oil and gas industry and continue to supply us with weapons and economic assistance.
Senator Manchin said that we need to change some policies that limit domestic production of gas and oil.
That means basically reversing some of the decisions that have been made, but no leasing, not drilling, and basically cutting back. We need energy independence more now than ever before.
That is the direction most Republicans want to take. Senator Josh Hawley is introducing a bill to allow leasing on public lands and reopening the Keystone Pipeline. But even if we become energy independent, our European allies are dependent on Russia for natural gas. In the meantime, U.S. officials have heard that Putin has become more frustrated and even angry, and there are major concerns that things could become more violent. Carrie Nunez, NTD News, Washington, D.C.
Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin and Maryland Governor Larry Hogan are responding to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Youngkin called for his state to cut any ties with Russian companies. He also ordered ending the sister city relationship between Norfolk and Roanoke between 2 Russian cities. In Maryland, Hogan moved to terminate the sister state relationship with the Russian region of St. Petersburg. The relationship existed since 1993, and it was intended to promote peace and prosperity through cultural exchange, something the Chinese regime has also utilized in soft power campaigns to dominate the world. And we speak to another member of Congress ahead of the State of the Union speech to get a feel for what the president might say. Will there be any way he can unite both parties? Twitter is suspending a Republican Congresswoman's account. We'll tell you why just coming up. For the first time since the pandemic began, the National Cherry Blossom Festival will be back in person this spring. Hello and welcome back to NTD's Capital Report. The United States is facing challenges on multiple fronts, from the southern border to managing China as they posture to take advantage of the Ukraine-Russia war. We asked Congressman John Rose of Tennessee to give his assessment and preview of the President's State of the Union address. Here's a look. Congressman John Rose, thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now, Congressman, we obviously have the State of the Union coming up tonight. What do you anticipate President Biden will be saying, and what do you think the current state of our union is?
Well, I think our union is in turmoil at the moment, and I hope that the president gives the American people an honest assessment. I fear he'll fall victim to the temptation to begin, as so many presidents have in the past, by saying the State of the Union is strong. I think if he does that, he'll lose the audience early. I think a more sober assessment would be the right message, and I think an indication from the president that he's willing to evolve, to adapt, and to change direction, and govern more in the way that he said he would as a candidate campaigning from his basement. I think if he tries to bring the country together, govern from the middle, his next 2 years will probably, or his next 3 years will be more successful than the first 400 days have been.
Now, do you think with all of this turmoil we're seeing in the Ukraine right now, it's going to add a little bit of a different element to his speech tonight?
Well, certainly. I think that we see presidents often challenged internationally, and it presents an opportunity for the president. I think the early going is that he's kind of fumbled the ball on this front as well. I think he emboldened President Putin and other despots around the world by telegraphing weakness on the part of his administration and on the part of the United States and our Western allies. So I think he has some responsibility for attracting this outcome. And so now I think anytime you make a bad first impression, you have to double down to correct that. And so this president's got his work cut out for him.
And on that note, do you think, emboldening dictators around the world, China, a lot of people are concerned that China's lurking in the shadows right now. Do we run the risk, if not handled the right way, of fortifying that relationship even more?
I think so. I think the Chinese, like the Russians, anytime you have a totalitarian regime, they often are more concerned about maintaining power than they are about the impact of their actions on their people. And I think we have that to fear with China. We see that with their mistreatment of the Uyghurs. We see that with the way that they have been treating their trading partners and allies around the world, and certainly the way they interact with the United States. And so we don't want to see them try to retake Taiwan. And so the president's actions here with respect to the Ukraine, I think, will help to tell the tale of what the Chinese decide to do.
Now, Congressman, on the domestic front, obviously Americans have been facing high inflation, gas prices. I just checked right now. It looks like oil has just broken $100 now at $106 a barrel. Is there anything that the current administration can do to lessen this burden on the American people?
Well, I think that the president needs to reverse the horrendous first-day policies that he implemented. We need to get the Keystone Pipeline online. We need to start green-lighting the construction of other pipelines so that we can consume energy that's produced right here in our country. Energy independence that we achieved during the Trump administration goes a long way toward advancing the foreign policy objectives of this country. I think, unfortunately, we see that now as we face the challenge from Russia. And so, I think the president also has to tack back to the middle in terms of the social spending policies that he's been trying to advance. It's runaway government spending and the printing of trillions of dollars that have created the inflationary cycle that we see now. And so the president has got to figure that out and accept the reality that increased social spending, programs like Build Back Better, are actually destructive to the spending power of Americans, and that ends up being a tax on working Americans.
Congressman Rose, thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Twitter is suspending a Republican congresswoman's account for saying that biological men should not be allowed to compete in women's sports. Missouri Congressman Vicky Hartzler tweeted on Monday that women's sports are for women, not men pretending to be women. Twitter then locked her account for violating their rules against what they call hateful conduct. Hartzler's campaign manager accuses Twitter of reaching, quote, the height of stupidity. And Pennsylvania Congressman Fred Keller says he will likely not run for re-election. Keller, a Republican, says he does not want to run against another Republican in the primaries. Pennsylvania recently redrew its congressional map. It combined Keller's district with that of Republican Congressman Glenn Thompson. Keller says he will prefer to bow out rather than run against another Republican. Keller wrote on Twitter saying he's still committed to helping take back the House, holding Pennsylvania's U.S. Senate seat, and electing a conservative governor. Washington, D.C.'s cherry blossoms will peak earlier than usual this year. The National Park Service made an announcement today.
And now this year we will be in person celebrating the Cherry Blossom Festival.
For the first time since the pandemic began, the National Cherry Blossom Festival will be back in person this spring, March 20th through April 17th. D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser said festival activities will happen all across Washington, D.C., which will include a parade, performances, and cultural events. The National Park Service predicts the peak time to view the cherry blossoms will be March 22nd through the 25th. This year's festival marks the 110th year since Tokyo gifted Washington with 3,000 cherry blossom trees as a symbol of friendship. That's all we have for you tonight on the Capitol Report. Thank you for tuning in. From Washington, D.C., I'm Steve Lance, and we'll see you tomorrow.